Greg Abbott thought he was untouchable until Jasmine Crockett opened a confidential folder on live TV. In seconds, Texas's most powerful man was exposed for knowingly risking women's lives for political gain. The room went silent. Then came 30 seconds of shame that could end his career. What was in that folder? And why did it terrify him? Before we get to this explosive moment, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe truth still matters, hit subscribe. We've got another jaw-dropping story coming tomorrow. The Texas state capitol was on edge. Reporters lined the back wall, protesters chanted outside, and pro-life signs filled every hallway. Inside the packed hearing room, Governor Greg Abbott took the microphone with a calm, commanding presence. His silver hair was immaculate, his suit sharp, his tone confident. Cameras rolled as he launched into his particular refrain, boasting that Texas was protecting innocent life and leaving the nation in moral courage. He spoke of values, faith, tradition. His supporters nodded and applauded, assured their governor had everything under control. Then Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett entered the frame. No yelling, no grandstanding, just a quiet, deliberate motion. She slid a thick manila folder across the witness table. It bore one word stamped in red: confidential. Abbott paused mid-sentence, his eyes locked on the folder. His grip on the podium tightened. Crockett opened the flap with courtroom precision, revealing page after page of internal government documents. The first one sat atop the stack. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Then came the moment that turned a standard state hearing into a political earthquake. "Governor Abbott," she said, her voice steady, "this email from your office says, 'We'll deal with the healthcare fallout after the midterms.' Care to explain that?" 30 seconds. The most powerful man in Texas couldn't speak. Twitter erupted. Abbott Expose hit 1 million tweets by sunset. News outlets scrambled to confirm the documents. Activists clipped the video and launched campaigns overnight. This wasn't just a slip-up. It was a reckoning. And to understand how a single congressional voice brought down a political empire, we have to go back to the woman who made it happen, and the truth she refused to let die. Her name, Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine Crockett didn't learn justice from textbooks or polished speeches. She learned it at a chipped kitchen table in South Dallas, where her grandmother kept a stack of unpaid bills next to a worn Bible and reminded her that survival in America, especially for black families, meant fighting for what the law promised, but rarely delivered. In that house, truth wasn't a performance, it was protection. When landlords lied, when police overreached, when schools failed, someone in her family had to stand up and say, "No more." Jasmine decided that someone would be her. She clawed her way through law school not to join a white show firm, but to return home and defend people the system chewed up. As a criminal defense attorney, she walked into courtrooms where her clients had already been convicted in the court of public opinion. She watched prosecutors stack charges like bricks. She saw how poverty turned misdemeanors into life sentences. She sat with mothers who didn't understand why their sons would never come home. She saw how policy written at marble desks in Austin translated into grief on cracked sidewalks in Dallas. But Jasmine was more than a fighter. She was a strategist. She understood the mechanics of power and how law could be weaponized against women, against black people, against the poor. So she ran for office not to join the process but to challenge it. She didn't campaign with platitudes. She campaigned with receipts, statistics, testimonies, case histories. Voters didn't just hear her, they trusted her because she wasn't there to make noise. She was there to make change. In Congress, she became a quiet storm. No theatrics, no gimmicks, just hard preparation and devastating clarity. When she questioned witnesses, they stumbled. When she presented evidence, the cameras couldn't look away. She fought for reproductive justice, not as an abstract principle, but as a matter of life and death. Her office became a place where women from Texas sent medical records, trauma, and truth. Evidence that the laws Greg Abbott signed weren't saving lives. They were destroying them. Abbott once dismissed her as just another protest politician, a soundbite machine from the progressive fringe. That was his mistake. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't protesting, she was prosecuting. And when she walked into the Texas state capitol with that confidential folder, she wasn't hoping for a moment. She was executing a plan. Greg Abbott didn't just govern Texas, he engineered it. His power wasn't loud, it was structural. Built through courts, committees, appointments, and carefully crafted language that always sounded like morality, but operated like control. He wore the language of life like armor, used values as a shield, and spent years mastering the art of saying everything without answering anything. In photo ops, he was compassionate. In policy rooms, he was ruthless. SB 8, the most restrictive abortion law in modern America, was his crowning achievement. It deputized strangers to police women's bodies, turned healthcare providers into targets, and pushed reproductive care out of reach for millions. Conservatives called it genius. Legal experts called it a constitutional nightmare. Abbott didn't care. He wasn't just passing laws. He was setting a template for other states to copy and accelerating a national movement built on fear, surveillance, and legal intimidation. But the machine had a problem the cameras couldn't see. Inside the governor's office, emails warned of maternal mortality spikes. Hospital administrators flagged risk. Doctors pleaded for legal clarity while watching women bleed in hallways. Republican strategists whispered about the political cost if the truth got out before midterms. Abbott didn't blink. He told his team to press forward and let someone else clean it up later. He believed he was untouchable. After all, Texas had re-elected him through blackouts, school shootings, and economic crises. If he could survive that, why worry about one congresswoman with a legal background and a microphone? Because she didn't bring a microphone. She brought his emails. In that hearing room, Abbott's image, carefully polished over a decade, met the one thing it couldn't survive: documented evidence that he knew the human cost of his laws and marched forward anyway. Jasmine Crockett didn't accuse him. She proved him, with his own words. From his own people. In his own building. Greg Abbott built his career on controlling the narrative, on shaping the facts, on staying ahead of outrage. But this time, the narrative wasn't his. The facts weren't his to twist, and the outrage, rapid, rooted, undeniable, belonged to the women of Texas, the families forced to suffer, and the congresswoman who came prepared to end the charade. His downfall didn't start when Jasmine Crockett opened that folder. It started when he decided Texans wouldn't notice what he buried in the dark. She just turned on the lights. The Texas State Capitol hearing room looked less like a venue for oversight and more like a stage. Cameras from every national outlet were locked in. Staffers lined the walls. In the front row, pro-life activists in coordinated shirts nodded along before the governor even spoke. Greg Abbott took the mic with the easy confidence of a man who'd rehearsed every syllable. Texas leads the nation in protecting innocent life. We are building a culture of life, one that supports mothers, protects babies, and strengthens families. Blame applause. Aporso. Rota looked quotes into their feeds. Abbott rolled into statistics about adoption resources, funding for maternal programs, and his administration's commitment to the most vulnerable among us. It was the same message platform he'd ridden for 2 years, just polished for this moment. He glanced toward the cameras, then toward the committee, a hint of a smile lingering like punctuation. Untouchable. In control. Except one person in the room wasn't clapping. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat at the witness table, silent, still, flipping through a binder stuffed with documents labeled TXDSH internal, hospital incident reporting, and legal risk memos. No theatrics, no interruptions, just patience. She waited until Abbott finished his stump speech and the chairman opened the floor. "Governor," she said, voice even and direct, "how many women have died from pregnancy causes in Texas since SB 8 was signed?" Abbott didn't miss a beat. "Congresswoman, Texas is deeply committed to improving maternal outcomes and—" "I'm asking for a number," she cut in smoothly. "Because according to this report from your own Department of State Health Services, maternal mortality in Texas has increased by 34% since the law went into effect." The air in the room shifted. Phones went up. Heads turned. Crockett slid the report forward so the cameras could see the state seal. That increase is not hypothetical. It's measured, verified, and disproportionately borne by black women, who are now 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy complications than white women in Texas. Abbott blinked. With respect, Congresswoman, there are many factors. You knew the factors, she replied. You were told the factors. I will get to that, Governor, but first, do you dispute the numbers? Silence. A glance at his aides. A subtle hesitation the cameras drank in. I'm not disputing the sincerity of your concern, he finally said, but the data needs context. The context, Crockett said, her voice growing firmer, is that under your leadership, doctors are afraid to provide life-saving care. The context is that women are bleeding while hospitals call their legal departments. The context is that Texas's maternal death rate is climbing while you talk about culture. The room no longer felt staged, it felt surgical. And Jasmine Crockett was holding the scalpel. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She let the truth do the moving. This, she said, lifting another document, is a sworn affidavit from an ER physician in San Antonio. She describes a patient experiencing an incomplete miscarriage. Standard care would have been immediate intervention. Instead, she was instructed to wait until the fetal heartbeat stopped on its own, because your law scared the hospital's legal counsel into paralysis. Abbott tried to interrupt. Congresswoman, these tragic cases... These predictable cases, she corrected. Cases your office was warned about. She held up a second stack. Civil lawsuits, filed against hospitals and doctors who tried to do their jobs. These are actions filed under SB 8's bounty structure. Regular citizens policing reproductive decisions, incentivized by your policy. Do you know how many doctors reported delaying care because of fear of litigation? Abbott exhaled through pursed lips. Texas is protecting life. Texas is protecting fear, Crockett shot back, still calm, still controlled. Now, let's talk about what your office protected. She pulled a new sheet from the binder. An internal email, the first line bold on the screen behind her. We'll deal with the healthcare fallout after the midterms. The hearing room gasped. Phones shot higher. Abbott's team shifted in their seats, panic registering in subtle glances and frantic typing. This email was sent from your policy director to your chief of staff, Crockett continued. It explicitly acknowledges that your office was warned of maternal mortality spikes, ER capacity issues, and legal confusion among providers. And the response was not to adjust policy. The response was to manage optics. Abbott tried again. Congresswoman, those emails are your emails, she said, voice like steel. Verified, time-stamped, sourced to your office. There is no out of context for that sentence. There is only the decision to ignore the human cost long enough to win another election. The cameras stayed trained on Abbott's face. His jaw was tight now, shoulders stiff. The calculation in his eyes flickered into something else. Exposure. And let's be very clear, Crockett said, spreading out charts like evidence before a jury. Black women in Texas are 3 times more likely to die. Rural hospitals are closing maternity units. Doctors are leaving the state, and every single one of those consequences was flagged to your staff before SB 8 was enforced. She paused, letting the numbers hang. The silence in the room was not respectful. It was stunned. Governor, she asked finally, are you proud of these numbers? Abbott's mouth opened, then closed. He gripped the podium, looked to his right, then to his left. No answer came. Because if you're not proud of them, Crockett continued, explain why you moved forward while knowing they were coming. For the first time, Greg Abbott looked like a man standing on a cliff with the ground crumbling beneath him, his talking points suddenly too small to hold his weight. Stats can be debated, emails can be spun, but Jasmine Crockett didn't end with documents, she ended with people. Governor, she said quietly, Let me introduce you to the women behind your numbers. She lifted a photograph. A young Latina woman with gentle eyes and a soft smile. This is Maria Santos from Houston. At 20 weeks, her doctors discovered a fatal fetal anomaly. Under your law, they refused to perform an abortion. She carried to term. She gave birth to a child she knew would not survive. She held her baby for 3 hours as it gasped for life and died in her arms. Do you know what her family calls that? Torture. A soft sob echoed from the gallery. The camera found Maria seated near the back, wiping tears with a trembling hand. Crockett lifted another photo. A teenager, barely old enough to drive. This is Sarah Williams from rural East Texas. She was 16. She was raped by her stepfather. Under your law, she could not get care in Texas. Her mother had to raise money online to drive her across state lines for a procedure that should have been handled with privacy and dignity. Instead, your policy turned her trauma into a public fundraiser. Abbott's team stared at the table in front of them. Not one of them met the camera. Finally, Crockett laid down a medical chart. And this, she said, her voice dropping, is a medical record from October 2022. A woman experiencing a miscarriage, bleeding, fainting, life in danger. But the hospital lawyers required proof of imminent death before allowing the standard procedure. She nearly died on the table. She paused, looked at Abbott, held his gaze. Her name was Jennifer Abbott. The room imploded. The collective intake of breath was audible. Abbott went white. For a moment, the governor of Texas, who had wrapped himself in policy, posture, and power, looked like he'd been stripped of all of it in a single sentence. She could be your daughter, Governor, your sister, your wife, and she almost died waiting for permission to receive care doctors already knew she needed. Abbott didn't speak. He couldn't. The cameras captured it. 30 seconds of silence that will live longer than any bill signing photo op. 30 seconds where the weight of human cost crushed the scaffolding of political defense. When he finally found his voice, it was thin. Texas never intended. Crockett cut him off. Governor, your emails say otherwise. The emotion that crept across his face wasn't anger. It was fear. Not of her, but of what she'd revealed. That the abstraction of policy had met the reality of pain, and he could not escape it. The room erupted. Applause. Shouts. Reporters dashing for the doors. Activists crying openly. Abbott staggered behind the podium, suddenly small against the wood he'd once commanded. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She gathered her documents, stacked them neatly, and folded her hands. This wasn't a political clash anymore. It was moral exposure. And Greg Abbott had nothing left to say. 2 days after Jasmine Crockett's blistering testimony, silence no longer protected Greg Abbott. The first leak came from an anonymous source inside the Texas Department of Health Services. A familiar contact in the Austin Press Corps received a digital draft 37 pages of internal correspondence, flagged with red headers reading, "Confidential and not for public reading issue." Within hours, the files had been verified by 2 major outlets. The documents matched the paper trail Crockett had exposed, word for word, date for date. But now, the public could read them in full. One email stood out like a bombshell detonated in a quiet room. Sent just 2 weeks before the midterm elections, it read, "Make the public-facing materials look pro-life. Ignore ER stats for now. We'll deal with backlash after the election cycle." Another, even more damning, came directly from Abbott's senior advisor. The subject line, "Abortion outcomes." The body, "The governor says no public link between the law and death data. Period." That sentence spread across social media like wildfire. The public outrage didn't come from just one side of the aisle. Yes, pro-choice advocates were furious, but moderate voters, many who had supported Abbott's law and order persona, felt betrayed. It wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about intentional deception. about hiding pain for politics. The Dallas Morning News published a front-page editorial. The numbers were known. The silence was chosen. The Austin American-Statesman followed. Healthcare fallout after midterms. The email that changed Texas. Even conservative-leaning papers couldn't look away. The Houston Chronicle editorial board wrote, "This isn't a partisan issue. It's a human one. The governor knew, and he buried the truth." On Fox News, one of the morning hosts broke ranks. "I'm sorry, but if these documents are real, and they've been verified, then someone needs to be held accountable. Women died. That's not spin. That's fact." The phrase, "healthcare fallout after midterms," became political poison. It trended on Twitter, then TikTok, then made it into protest chants across Texas. High school students spray-painted it on campus sidewalks. College campus rallies adopted it as their slogan. Even mainstream anchors used it to summarize the administration's moral failure. By the end of the week, reporters no longer asked Abbott about abortion policy. They asked, "Why did you suppress healthcare data?" He gave no answer. But Jasmine Crockett did. She stood on the Capitol steps once more, holding a printout of the leaked emails and looking directly into the cameras. This is not about right or left. It's not about red or blue. It's about life and death, and the lies that let people die quietly so politicians could win loudly. The ground had shifted, and Greg Abbott was standing on the fault line. The backlash didn't simmer, it exploded. Within 48 hours of the internal leak, major conservative figures began distancing themselves from Governor Greg Abbott. Fox News anchors who once praised his policies now wore stiff expressions on air. Laura Ingraham called the leaked documents deeply troubled. He simply said, "If these emails are what they appear to be, someone's got some serious explaining to do." Abbott's press team scrambled. First, they issued a vague statement blaming misinterpreted language taken out of context. Then, they attempted to pivot to immigration policy. Neither landed. In fact, both made it worse. When a reporter asked if the governor stood by the healthcare fallout email, his press secretary froze, stammered, then abruptly ended the briefing. That 23-second clip went viral within minutes, captioned, "Even his team can't lie for him anymore." Crockett, meanwhile, wasn't on defense. She was everywhere. MSNBC, CNN, NPR. Not with outrage or personal attacks, but with patient prosecutorial precision. On each show, she displayed receipts, timelines, medical charts, verified testimonies. One by one, she dismantled Abbott's defense with the calm fury of a woman who had come prepared for war. And the country was listening. Texas saw protests in Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio. Not just for reproductive rights, but against government deception. Students, nurses, pastors, even military veterans flooded the streets carrying signs that read, "We are the fallout, and truth doesn't need context." In D.C., Democratic lawmakers began calling for a formal congressional inquiry. Senator Raphael Warnock tweeted, "Silencing women's pain for political convenience isn't governance, it's cowardice." Even centrist Republicans began to fidget uncomfortably in interviews. One Texas congressman, speaking off-record to Politico, admitted, "It's hard to defend what looks like intentional harm." Meanwhile, Abbott tried a televised address from the governor's mansion. He wore a Navy suit and stood in front of the Texas and American flags. He called the emails incomplete snippets and said the policy saved more lives than it harmed. But something had shifted. His words felt mechanical, defensive, hollow. Then came the interview that sealed it. A former Abbott aide went on record with the Texas Tribune. She confirmed the strategy behind SB 8 wasn't just about ideology, it was about political capital. "The maternal death numbers scared people inside the administration," she said. "We were told to bury it. They didn't want to give Democrats a soundbite." That was the final crack. Abbott's approval rating nosedived 19 points in 1 week, the largest single-week drop in Texas gubernatorial polling history. Conservative donors paused their contributions. Republican primary challengers began testing the waters. The empire was hemorrhaging. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett said very little publicly. She let the truth speak, the facts breathe. Because she knew something the governor didn't. Once people see the truth, they don't unsee it. It was a Friday morning in Austin, but the Capitol building felt like a funeral. Reporters lined the hallway outside the governor's press room. Cameras were stacked like dominoes, and staffers whispered nervously, eyes darting toward the double doors. The rumor had broken overnight. Governor Greg Abbott would not seek re-election. But when the doors opened, it was more than that. Greg Abbott wheeled himself to the podium, flanked by 2 aides and a visibly shaken press secretary. His tie was crooked, his voice cracked. What was supposed to be a controlled statement turned into a quiet unraveling. After much thought, he began, and deep concern for how my leadership has been represented in recent weeks, I will step down as governor of the state of Texas, effective at the end of this legislative session. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the conservative outlets froze. No spin, no re-election games. It was over. Abbott didn't take questions. Instead, he read from a prepared sheet and claimed the media environment had become too toxic for effective governance. He blamed misinformation, hysteria, and weaponized narratives. But no one was buying it. Not this time. Not after the emails. Not after the testimonies. Not after the truth had bled across every screen in America. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't gloat. She didn't mock. Instead, that same afternoon, she stood beneath the blazing Texas sun outside the state capitol. Dozens of survivors stood behind her. Maria Santos, Sarah Williams, Jennifer Abbott, the faces of policies designed in silence. Her voice was steady but fierce. Let me be clear. Resignation is not accountability. Stepping down doesn't erase the cost women have paid, with their bodies, their dreams, and in some cases their lives. Reporters captured every word. This isn't about one man. It's about a system that believed no one would ask hard questions. A system that gambled with healthcare and treated truth like an inconvenience. But here's the thing. We asked the questions, and the people answered. Then came the line heard across the nation. We are done bleeding in silence. That clip alone amassed 30 million views in 24 hours. Protesters adopted it as a chant. Celebrities repeated it on red carpets. Activists printed it on shirts and banners. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a reckoning. Greg Abbott never returned to the spotlight. He issued one final tweet thanking supporters and then disappeared from the public eye. But Crockett's work had just begun. She introduced new legislation ensuring mandatory maternal health transparency at the state level. Hearings began into how state data was suppressed. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, and for the first time in Texas history, a bipartisan coalition moved to evaluate the medical impact of every bill affecting women's health. Because truth, once uncovered, can't be buried again. And Jasmine Crockett had proven, once and for all, that no governor is above accountability. Not even in Texas. The resignation didn't end the outrage. It ignited it. It ignited it. Abbott resigned sat atop Twitter for 3 straight days, but the second wave hashtag told the deeper story. Healthcare fallout at Fishkick. Into TikToks, law students were breaking down the leaked emails in long-form threads, and nurses were posting raw videos about what it felt like to call legal departments while patients bled. Late-night shows looped Abbott's 30 seconds of silence like a national punchline, but activists treated it like evidence, proof of what happens when power plays politics with people's bodies. Money followed fury. Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, Jane's Due Process, and dozens of smaller Texas abortion funds reported record-breaking donations. One org posted a simple update. We raised more in 48 hours than in the last 4 months combined. Volunteer portals crashed. Hotlines for reproductive care lit up with new legal aid, OBGYNs offering testimony, and students asking where they could canvass. Pollsters moved fast. Abbott's favorability cratered, especially among suburban women and independent voters who had once trusted his calm tone over his hard policy. Focus groups in Dallas and Houston said the same thing in different words. This wasn't about ideology anymore. It was about betrayal. The numbers terrified Republicans down ballot. Quiet internal memos warned of a Jasmine effect, a measurable drop among women under 45 whenever her clips were shown. Democrats pounced. State parties blasted fundraising emails with Crockett's quotes. "We are done bleeding in silence" became both a rallying cry and a donor subject line. Texas Democrats opened new field offices fueled by small-dollar donations. County chairs reported first-time volunteers walking in and saying, "I saw her, I'm in." Then came the crossover moment. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "This is what fearless accountability looks like," tagging Crockett. The retweets crossed party lines. Even a few conservative influencers, careful, cautiously posted some version of, "I disagree with her politics, but she brought the receipts." That admission, rare and reluctant, signaled something deeper. The moral center had shifted. In less than a week, Texas wasn't just talking about abortion. It was talking about the cost of lying, about who pays for political optics, about the difference between pro-life rhetoric and pro-human policy. The nation wasn't just watching anymore. It was choosing sides. Jasmine Crockett didn't ride the wave. She redirected it. She skipped the victory lap and went straight to work. CNN, MSNBC, NPR, The View. She showed up on all of them not to gloat, but to lay out a roadmap. Transparency mandates, maternal mortality reporting requirements, physician protection laws, and whistleblower shields. Professors clipped her interviews for lectures. Law schools added her cross-examination to syllabi under a new unit title. Law students clipped her interviews for lectures. Law schools added her cross-examination to syllabi under a new unit title. L'aujourd'hui. Her approval numbers surged. A Texas Tribune poll found her favorability up double digits statewide, with a stunning jump among independent women. Within days, run for Senate trended. Draft committees formed organically. Even some old guard fighters who stayed out of cultural battles started making calls. This wasn't just charisma, it was competence. But she didn't live on cable hits. She went back to the people in her folder. She visited Maria Santos, sat with her in her living room and listened. She met with Sarah Williams' mother, not for a camera, but to connect her with legal resources and trauma counseling. She called Jennifer Abbott, yes, that Jennifer, and thanked her for allowing her case to be included, for sharing the record that shattered the governor's composure. Those moments didn't trend. They didn't need to. They were the proof that Crockett never lost sight of the point. Policy touches people. Her words kept echoing. Resignation is not accountability. And the country heard her. Across the map, state legislators, Democrat and a few Republican, filed open records requests to demand internal communications around abortion bans, ER protocols, and mortality data. A representative in Ohio cited Crockett's hearing as the inspiration for a maternal mortality oversight bill. A blue state senator introduced a bill requiring states receiving federal health funds to publicly post maternal outcomes quarterly. This wasn't a viral clip anymore. It was a blueprint. Commentators tried to box her in. Future Senate candidate, future AG, future governor. But Crockett didn't box herself. When asked what's next, she said the one thing power never wants to hear. More truth, more receipts, more accountability. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win. She rewrote the rules of how you do it. Standing at a podium framed by the Texas flag behind her, Jasmine Crockett delivered her final remarks, not as a victor, but as a reminder. Her voice was steady, her tone measured, but full of purpose. This wasn't about destroying one man, she began, her eyes scanning a room filled with cameras and silence. It was about making the truth undeniable. She didn't celebrate Abbott's downfall. She didn't list her accolades. Instead, she redirected the moment toward the people, toward those who had been silenced, shamed, or ignored. This was about Maria, who had to carry grief for 9 months. About Sarah, whose childhood was shattered while adults played politics. About Jennifer, who nearly died waiting for permission to be human. We've had enough. She paused, letting the gravity settle. We can't wait for leaks or lawsuits to get the truth. We have to demand it, at every level, from every official. You deserve more than slogans and stagecraft. You deserve numbers. You deserve records. You deserve answers. Then, she called out the spin machines directly. When politicians say, "There's no crisis," ask for the ER data. When they claim to protect life, ask who's still bleeding. Don't let narratives replace facts. Her voice rose, not in volume, but in conviction. This is not a partisan issue. This is not a women's issue. This is a human rights issue, and it's time we start treating it like one. The final line was simple, a declaration for every person who's ever been gaslit by power. We proved that facts still matter, that voices still rise, and that silence, no matter how powerful, can be broken. Then came the moment for all of us. If you believe that truth still deserves a platform, subscribe. If you think voices like Crockett's need to be heard, share this video. If you know the next fight is coming, stay ready. Because next time it might be your governor in the hot seat. And when that moment comes, truth needs witnesses. Let's be those witnesses, together, right here, right now.